Hey everybody, here is a video I tried to make yesterday, but I could not put two intelligent words back to back, so I scrapped it. Some days are like that, but while I have a few minutes and I actually feel like talking, I thought I would try to do this. I'm going to try to answer more than a few questions that I've had and do it on one ancient spot in the world. But we are flying in to ancient Harran in southeastern Turkey, and this is a very important spot. I made a video about this about a year ago, but there is more I can add to this and answer a few questions. And the more I have looked into ancient Harran, the more I realize this was so important. And I know a lot of people are saying Harran, what's Harran? But I know some of you have heard of this. But let's just back out here. And this area of the world has such important connections to the biblical text and the origin of where those stories are that are written to fit the biblical narrative. But this is Harran down here, built on an ancient, I guess what is called a tell or a tepe, which is basically a mound that is just built up over thousands of years of occupation. But a half hour north is the 12,000-year-old site of Gobekli Tepe. I know a lot of you have heard of that. And just to the northwest is ancient Edessa, present-day Sanliurfa, ancient Urfa, which I have no doubt is ancient of the Bible. There are shrines here to the Abraham. This is his birthplace. And there are some ancient texts that connect this area of the world to Enoch and Seth and Shem and even Noah, which, is really the stories of Genesis, and they can be directly connected to this area. And, people say, well, Noah, the story is his ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, but actually the original text says that Noah's ark came to rest at Kudeta, which is northeast of Harran. And I can't help but, think that Gobekli Tepe is in this area. And some of those original stories from Genesis come from this area. And ancient Harran, in the local lore, and the earliest descriptions of the name of this place, this is the mound of Enoch. And the archaeological story here is they have dug down, and once again, this is just a tell or a tepe that is just built up over thousands of years of occupation, and they have dug down and found remains that they can date back 6,000, 7,000 years. So obviously, that is a very ancient site, and when you have the very ancient site of Gobekli Tepe right near it, then, you got to wonder if these two sites are connected, and I'm going to go into just a little bit of that in a little while. But here is a look, just one picture, and I'm going to go over to a website. But this is all that is left of the ruins of ancient Harran, and there are temples here, and this site can be associated with the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and especially the Sabians. I think that is a very important period, and I'm going to get into that in just a bit. But now, this tower here was an astronomical observatory, and all the ancient texts say that this was built in honor of an even more ancient tower. The person who is associated with the building of this tower is Nemrut in one lore, and Nemrut, he is associated with building the Tower of Babel. And I believe the origin of that story comes from ancient Harran and that tower and what was originally here thousands and thousands of years ago, just because the area is directed to the Genesis stories. And it just makes sense to me. And if you want to comment, go right ahead if you disagree with that. Now, this is unchartedruinsblogspot.com, and of course I'll leave a link below, but here is a look at the tell or tepe, this artificial mound built up over thousands of years of occupation with its astronomical tower, observatory tower at the top of it, built in remembrance of even a more ancient tower. And I'm going to read from this website, but first I just want to read a paragraph from a book called The History of the Ancient World by Chester G. Starr. And he talks about this area of the world. It says, looming over the homes of men were the temples, very literally conceived as the houses of the gods. The special god of the city had his own walked precinct, and his temple was often elevated on an artificial mound. The step mounds and towers, such as the biblical Tower of Babel, were imitation mountains. According to the early Mesopotamian thought, the mountains were the focus of the powers of the earth. And I just thought that was a pretty interesting paragraph written in that book, and he talks about the powers of the earth. And I did a video here, Sogmatar, Temple of the Seven Planets in the Hall of Records. And this is a video I'm pretty proud of just because nobody else has made a video on this very important, very mysterious ancient site found not too far away from Harran and Gobekli Tepe. And I will leave a link for this below. But it seems the powers of the earth and magnetism and the seven planets were honored at this temple. Now, this is unchartedruins.blogspot.com. And they have an excellent article here on the Sabians. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs from this. It says, the name of Harran originally came from the ancient Akkadian Haranu, meaning crossroad. According to tradition, Harran was first founded by Nemrut, the legendary hero who was credited by biblical scholars for building the Tower of Babel. It was already a flourishing center by the 2nd millennium BC, famous throughout Mesopotamia and the Eastern world for its famous temple to the moon god Sin. Now it says here, the city was clearly established according to a Hermetic ground plan, and it says it had 7 gates dedicated to each of the planetary deities, Sun, Moon, considered equal to the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, according to the principles of talismanic magic. It was circular in shape and had a large temple in its center surmounted by a high tower, which I just showed you. Now, I think this is very important. Now, Harran became the Hermetic capital of the world around maybe a little over 2,000 years ago. I think the people who kept the mystery schools and all of that ancient knowledge from Egypt, I don't think they were too happy with the way things were going in Egypt. Christianity eventually took over, and the Hermetic capital of the world moved from Egypt to Harran. And there are more than a few sources that say that. And I believe what we know as the tarot cards today, that symbolism was originally laid out in ancient Harran. The name Sabians is likely a derivation from the Coptic Sabiia, meaning people of the stars, likely a reminiscence of a very ancient star cult which had its roots in ancient Egyptian religion, the cult of the Magi of ancient Persia, and the Western Hermetic tradition. The linkage between the Sabians of Harran and Egypt was even made stronger by their annual pilgrimage to the pyramids of Giza, quoted by several Arabic writers, which the Sabians believed were the tombs of Hermes Trismegistus, built before the flood. A famous phrase written over the main entrance door to the largest temple of Harran could still be read by an Arabic historian, Masudi, in 943 AD, "Know yourself, and you will become God." And that comes from the Gospel of Thomas. And I believe the Gospel of Thomas was written in the monastery right below the first Church of Christ that I showed you about a month ago in that monastery. As soon as Christianity became the religion of Rome, ancient Edessa, Sanliurfa today, it was proclaimed the city of the twin, Thomas, and I thoroughly believe that comes from the holy image we know today as the Shroud of Turin. Now, the city of Harran in the tarot cards, I'm just going to read this here. It says, to add to the sense of mystery that surrounds this city of the dead, several authors have seen a connection between the Tower of Harran and the Tower card stricken by bolts of lightning in the major arcana of the tarots. Another card of the tarot, the Moon card, also bears a close resemblance to a couple of nearby columns located in Sanliurfa and popularly indicated by the name of the throne of Nimrud, which were also closely associated to the worship of the moon god Sin. And it says, these are probably the same pillars mentioned by the Jewish Roman historian Josephus in the land of Syriad as the work of the sons of Seth before the flood. And I totally agree with that. And here is the tower card of the tarot. And here is the ancient tower in Harran. And not only do I believe this is the origin of the tarot, Harran, just because it was the Hermetic capital of the world starting about 2,000 years ago, but I also believe this is where the tablets of Hermes, the emerald tablets of Hermes, was written, just because it makes the most sense to me, and historians have located it to this time period in this area. And here it says, Harran, the great tower of the astrologers overlooking the plain of Harran. Note the similarity with the tarot card of the tower struck by lightning. The tarot deck likely originated in the Islamic Middle Ages, and Harran was one of the major centers of learning and Hermetic philosophy at the time. And once again, there is the Tower of Harran, and the tarot card, the tower. And here are the twin pillars located in Sanliurfa today, ancient Edessa. And it says, the two ancient columns that overlook the ancient citadel of Urfa from the top of the Acropolis are known by the locals as the throne of Nimrud, since Nimrud had, according to legend, his palace on the hill of Urfa. The columns actually date to the 2nd or 3rd century AD. A Syriac inscription reads, I am Ephthua, son of the sun. I had these columns rebuilt for me and my queen. And there is these two columns that were built in the 2nd or 3rd century, a history and historical period that was crucial to the birth of Christianity, because even in the Bible it says the first Christians came from this very town. And this is identified as Antioch in the Bible, and this is the Antioch that they are clearly talking about. So it seems pretty evident that the Hermetic tradition that evolved out of the mythologies and teachings and text of the ancient Egyptians, what is called the Hermetic tradition, which is basically, I think, just the Greco-Roman version of the Egyptian stories of Thoth and their main gods in Egypt. And it is a cosmological background to those stories. And the Hermetic, what is called the Hermetic tradition, moved up to Harran. And the history of Harran could go back as far as Gobekli Tepe. And here is Harran, here is Gobekli Tepe, and there is also Karahan Tepe over here, which is an artificial mound that has these giant T columns, T pillars, sticking out of the ground. You just can't help but trip over them, and not any archaeological work has been done there. And Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins visited that site, and Graham Hancock mentions it in his book, Magicians of the Gods. And we have Sogmatar over here, which I made that video on, and nobody has really investigated that site at all on YouTube. And when you can't find a video on YouTube about something, you know it's pretty much lost history right there. But Graham Hancock, in his book Magicians of the God, mentions an interesting geodetic coincidence between Harran and very ancient Gobekli Tepe. And I'm just going to read, and he cites the work of a guy named Jacobs here. He says, the sites are apparently intervisible, just over 40 kilometers apart. The difference in latitude from Harran to Gobekli Tepe equals precisely 1/1000th of the Earth's circumference. This is where we enter a twilight zone in ancient astronomy. And it says, Harran is located at 3/4 a tan latitude, a fixed parameter, and Gobekli Tepe is at a specific latitude difference north. Because the fixed parameter must come first, the conundrum, of course, is that this precise 1/1000th of circumference latitude difference is either a coincidence or ancient astronomy just took a leap back to 12,000 years ago. And I don't doubt anything happening 12,000 years ago, because we have evidence of some civilization that was capable of mapping the stars, observing the stars, and creating symbolism relating to that. And I just don't doubt anything that happened. Now, 12,000 years ago, when I first started looking into ancient history, the stories of Atlantis were kind of far-fetched to me. But the discoveries made in especially the last 20 years and the more fabulous research done by historians such as John Anthony West and Graham Hancock and others, where they have really brought out this lost history, where we can see the history we were taught about civilization starting 6,000 years ago is absolutely ridiculous. Now, in conclusion, so much of this area of the world is connected to the Genesis tales and just the local lore of the place and the ancient text referring to the names of the people who are associated with this area of the world and these very ancient sites. It's just clear to me that this is where a lot of the stories of Genesis came from. And of course, we have the story of the Watchers, and people get all freaked out about that. The story coming from this book of Enoch, who is associated with these sites in this area. And the story of the Watchers, I mean, in so many tales of ancient text, whoever these people are who are encountered in very early history appear to be godlike. And in my Manly Hall upload of a couple weeks ago, he kind of goes over what the story of why these people are referred to as godlike, and they were not angels and they were not aliens. I just think they were highly enlightened people that were maybe descendants of a place that we most commonly call Atlantis. And the Watchers are written about in a very specific way, and I just think that is just all in formation with the biblical narrative and what they really want to say in that text. And if you really look at the book of Enoch, what it says is the Watchers mated with the women, and of course then they are written about in a negative way, because of course you would be upset if a culture came in and mated with your women. I just look at it in common sense terms. And it also says the Watchers brought civilization to the people of this area, just as the stories of the sages brought civilization to Egypt and the Anunnaki to Samaria and the 7 rays of light to the people around India. I think it is all a story of a culture that we have lost track of, that brought civilization to different areas of the world, including Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. So I think we just have stories that are written with certain narratives in mind, and that's why certain people are talked about in angelic terms and in sometimes negative terms. But the Watchers, it is a fascinating story coming from the Book of Enoch, and personally I think the author of the Book of Enoch might have been dabbling in mind-altering substances, but that's just a fascinating story that is left out of the Bible, as other texts are, for specific reasons. You know what? I have babbled enough. That is a story of ancient Harran, the nearby ancient sites that are directly connected to the stories of Eden, Abraham, and other people coming from biblical and apocryphal texts. I have talked way too long. Hope you thought that was interesting, and you all have a very nice day.